Welcome each and every one of you to our Gems from the Wisdom Traditions Conversation Circle, where today we are taking up the topic of Aquarian Civilization. This is a very appropriate week for taking up the topic because on Monday, June 19th, we will celebrate the anniversary of the beginning of the Aquarian age, according to astronomical calculations, which happened in 1902. And so at that point in time, we passed from the Piscean age into this Aquarian age, according to what's going on up in the heavens. We have someone who wants to be introduced as a friend of Gems from the Wisdom Traditions and a longtime theosophist, student of theosophy, who will present this idea of Aquarian civilization for us to take up and converse upon from the Theosophical tradition. So I give you Dr. Jim Tepfer.
Yes, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk with you about a topic as, in a sense, aesthetically beautiful from the standpoint of thought, at the same time, very enigmatic. I was fortunate to have an opportunity to listen to someone give a presentation on this very topic in another class, and she did a wonderful, brilliant job. I'm going to be gleaning, what I've done is kind of glean different elements from different articles on the Aquarian age in various themes on that by Sri Raghavan Iyer. And what I'm doing, basically what you're going to get is a kind of hopefully intelligent speculation. It's not based on actual knowledge, but on what seems to be something that from a Aquarian theosophical perspective is possible, is feasible. It's something that we can actually see as being not only possible, but something highly desirable. And so I'll begin with a quote, reading a quote from Hermes, which is a theosophical journal authored by Sri Raghavan Iyer. And the quote is as follows: "The universal Aquarian diffusion of the true ideal of spiritual science and lifelong learning will enable human beings to awaken a vibrant sense of universal justice, universal compassion, and universal concord." Now, in the previous Piscean age, early Christian philosophy stressed the horizontal dimension of love in Christ's teachings and not the vertical dimension or truth. There was a deliberate emphasis on the leveling impulse of love, its creative expanse, and its inclusive qualities. It was believed that the power of pure love can only be realized when it is resolutely enacted, when it is intelligently expressed, when it is given voice, when it is shared. This led, as it did in Buddhism, to universal missionary work. The latter was seen as a sacred obligation. It was viewed as bringing the teachings of Christ to strangers in strange lands. Missionary efforts, whether institutionally mandated or individually inspired, became a divine offering, or love in action. Those who spread the gospel of unconditional love with genuineness and courage evoked in the receptive spirit dreams and visions, which became the signature of each one's spiritual authenticity. Christ's teachings were truly sacred because they expressed the finer, most holy feelings embedded in the compassionate heart of man. Faith and the power of love were the cleansing agents of all sincere devotees of the Christian way of life. This very approach was a reflection of the Piscean mentality. In the Aquarian age, as one understands it from the seminal writings of Sri Raghavan Iyer, the emphasis in Aquarian civilization will be on the vertical or truth, and less so on the horizontal or love, but not exclusively. It's a matter of emphasis. In other words, the inner quest for spiritual truths will be paramount in the age of Aquarius. The gestation of spiritual insights will call for the progressive transformation of the mind from its preoccupation with materialistic desires and appetites to an uplifting focus on more humane and unselfish aspirations. The cultivation of the altruistic mind then will be the predominant focus of Aquarian society. It will be a vitalizing presence in all Aquarian institutions. The alchemical agent of the mind's moral elevation will be the radiant fire of the immortal soul, the soul itself being the repository of all spiritual knowledge. There will be a concerted effort in Aquarian cultures to marry the intellectual with the spiritual, the mind with the efflux of the immortal all-knowing soul. The consummation of this control will be the birth of revelatory insights. What kind of revelatory insights? Into the quintessential characteristics of the cosmos and man. Thus, in many Aquarian societies, there will be fearless spiritual mountain climbers, individuals seeking to discover encompassing perspectives and enriching vistas that can complement the infinite horizontal reach of divine love, which the Piscean age encouraged. Paradoxically, empirical science will be important in the Aquarian civilizations of ensuing centuries, because it will become more self-critical, inwardly agnostic, and open to the spiritual. Why will science change so radically? Because science will continue to encounter new mysteries that it simply cannot solve with its limited methodologies and its implicit materialistic assumptions that posit a kind of happen-chance cosmos bereft of any internal guiding intelligence. Even in today's scientific community, there are those who admit that the established laws of physical nature are so complex and delicately balanced that it is perfectly sensible for a scientist to entertain the possible existence of what the mathematical physicist Freeman Dyson termed a cosmic mind governing everything. And by the way, Freeman Dyson said that cosmic intelligence, if it exists, is also reflected in man and also reflected in the atom. That's a very spiritual perspective. Furthermore, the recognition of the inescapable fact of consciousness as a constant of the cosmos still has to be faced by science. And it could well be that philosophy will necessarily become a co-partner with science in the effort to conceptualize an emerging mental and material topography, which is revolutionary and could unexpectedly validate the revelatory experiences of mystics, initiate, spiritual philosophers, and intuitive scientists of every culture known to man. Contrary to what one might expect, the increasing agnosticism of science will not necessarily lead to an increase in nihilism or atheism in society at large. Rather, this deeper agnosticism of science will encourage a wholesome self-questioning in every field of modern knowledge. This salubrious contagion of intellectual self-distancing will come about as a result of pioneering scientists doing what? Turning within, in order to identify science's own built-in knowledge parameters. When they do, they will be thrilled at the prospect of a deeper unknown that exists beneath and beyond the known universe. This discovery of a deeper unknown will be both humbling and encouraging. The best and most perceptive scientists will then turn without to contemplate and examine philosophical perspectives that long ago acknowledged the existence of the spirit or of universal consciousness. More importantly, perhaps, many scientists will come to recognize and accept the truth that the unbounded spiritual can inform and illuminate the mind of man. For too long, there's been a separation between spirit and mind. And here we will, as we are pointing to, the spiritual will actually has a cognitive element that is universal and luminous. And so the mind, when it's in the proper posture to the spirit, will find itself increasingly lit up to where it begins to see the world in a much deeper, more variegated way. They will independently, these scientists who will be pioneering scientists in the Aquarian age, they will independently discover what spiritual teachers have always known and taught, namely that the spiritual, the intellectual, and the experiential are dynamically integrated. They will come to recognize what the Gnostic Christians claimed, that while faith is necessary in the quest for truth or God realization, the ultimate goal is spiritual knowledge. Analogically speaking, faith is the space between steps on an ascending staircase, and knowledge the steps themselves. Both are necessary. The innate vertical dimension, or I should say the innate vertical momentum of truth, will thus wake up scientists to the likelihood that nature and man must be seen as tiered, as multi-leveled. The most intuitive scientists will come to understand that there are plateaus in the human mind, as well as in nature, that there are subsequently different orders of experience, perception, and rationality. But the love of truth, the highest love, eventually awakens intuition, which is pure perception and gradual realization of the reality of deity in man and nature. Thus, there will be mystics and metaphysicians in science. And philosophy, the royal discipline, will, as previously noted, no longer be the reluctant servant of science. Rather, philosophy will be the happy guide of human investigation into the unknown that points to the existence of untapped creative potentials that lie latent not only in nature, but in man. Aquarian civilization will stress in its educational centers the myriad possible connections between spiritual ideals and ever-evolving human circumstances. Moral logic will therefore become as important as the logic of reason. There will be an unapologetic emphasis in Aquarian civilizations on universal justice, universal compassion, and universal concord. For this reason, there will be among men and nations multiple allegiances that ultimately transcend geopolitical borders. There will be fidelity to one's conscience, loyalty to parapolitical principles that potentially harmonize relationships within one's society, a strong sense of responsibility for the actions of one's particular nation, and an abiding commitment to all global efforts to alleviate various forms of physical, emotional, and spiritual suffering. Thus, the age of Aquarius could conceivably usher in what has been rightly called an empathic civilization, a civilization rooted in truth, compassion, and nonviolence. Beyond all this, it could well be that in the future, meditation will be as natural as taking a daily shower to cleanse one's body. And meditation, or the cleansing of the heart and mind through focus on spiritual ideals, will no longer be something unique to Eastern philosophies or to Christian and Sufi mysticism. Indeed, meditation, combined with service to others, will constitute the twin pillars of spiritual and moral health. As a consequence, pathological loneliness and a host of cognate mental illnesses will gradually diminish as a sense of inner fullness increases. Furthermore, as skillful meditation becomes more widely practiced, the demands for medications and drugs will wane and lose their appeal. Psychotherapy will be transformed into moral therapy, and truthful and trusted friends will replace the need for expensive therapists. Most significantly, altruism will awaken in true practitioners of meditations, whose minds enter into the light of the immortal soul, and thereby are able to release divine love, which heals as well as purifies. In the Aquarian civilization of tomorrow, People will learn the art of thoughtful and compassionate silence. This spiritual reticence will be natural because there will be a pervasive feeling of reverence for the omnipresent divine. Society will be sanctified and blessed by unusual souls whose very presence is an embodied of the inspirited mind and whose every utterance and gesture will constitute a teaching. Love, too, will be rescued from lust and possessiveness and will flow omnidirectionally to peoples everywhere and will embrace all sentient beings. In the societies of future centuries, men and women will become skilled in the practice of true friendship within the circle of marriage. How so? True lovers will learn from the ancient Chinese and not engage in the excessive verbalization of love, which itself is the pure joy that the soul feels when in the presence of the beloved. The power of conjugal love will be expressed in many ways, but rarely verbally. Love, admiration, and reverence will move spontaneously from the pure heart and express themselves through the glow of sweetness in the eyes, through tenderness of touch, through gentleness of gesture, through a respectful tone of voice, and through acts of spontaneous kindness and deliberate forgiveness. And when the word love is whispered at the appropriate time in the ear of the beloved, it will echo the celestial. And it may well be that the listening gods above will be so moved by that powerful, simple act that they will bow in admiration before such purity of feeling and sanctity of expression. Lastly, and most importantly, men and women in the Aquarian civilizations to come will grow up revering the sages, spiritual exemplars, and heroes of the past, as well as unabashedly celebrating global pioneers of the present. The fortunate few in a mature Aquarian civilization will have been taught at an early age the sacred art of raising questions, and most tellingly, how to patiently think through a social issue, a math problem, a moral dilemma, or a family crisis. They will not be strangers to rethinking an idea, to musing and meditating in solitude, to learning from unexpected mystical flashes, to consulting their own inner genius, and to summoning the better angels of their deeper nature. They will immensely enjoy the elevating dynamics of human interaction for the focused good of society. And finally, today's pathfinders, preparing for the high civilizations to come, will resonate to the closing stanzas of Longfellow's moving poem, A Psalm of Life. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present. Heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Such is my vision of the Aquarian civilization of tomorrow. So those are my thoughts in terms of this most engrossing and enigmatic topic. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jim. I feel as if we got to have a waking experience of this incredibly beautiful dream of the future and what it could hold, not just for ourselves, but for humanity of a long distance future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to think it out. I went from saying, oh, yeah, this is really interesting, then going on to saying, no, but I look at it more closely. No, I have to rethink it. And it became a wonderful exercise in trying to formulate the unformulatable, but to pinpoint things. There were good hooking points for the mind and for consciousness and for the heart in relation to the future. But the wonderful interplay between truth and unconditional love is such a wonderful marriage to consider. And it just has so many dimensions to it that it gives birth, to so many wonderful ideas and opens up different modes of communication between people, I think. When you have love that's also filtered through the eye of truth, and truth working with the energy of love, you get something quite remarkable in terms of human relationships and how problems dissolve, almost solve themselves, when that kind of truthful love and loving truth interface with people who have like mind and heart. It's amazing how many things dissipate, how many clouds, blow away, how much the healing rains come, so to speak, and wash us and help us to be better human beings.
Does somebody want to start us off in our conversation? Dina.
Yeah, first I want to thank Jim for, once again, very enlightening talk. And I am, like you opened with enigmatic, and I'm more questions than I got some answers. So I'm going to ask you the first question. Do we have any analogs to Age of Aquarius in the Indian Sanskrit traditions? Because they are the eons, the age of truth, age of, people say, oh, it's the Kali Yuga right now. It's the worst time in the world. As we look around, it's a dark age. And here is a breath of fresh air to see, no, we have this light, we have this love, we have this truth. And I see that glimpses of that as well around us. So how do we reconcile these two, this Kali Yuga and Age of Aquarius? And why, the second question is, why is not a very mainstream idea? I mean, it's very sort of new age or, in a circles that are not, mainstream conversations. So I have many more questions, but I'll just end there. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. First of all, the main clue, I think the main thing with mainstream media is don't listen to it. Pico Ira said, no, I never listened to the mainstream media because it's all untrue. End of story. So that's the first one. Secondly, this is far from New Age because it has a lot, it's in terms of intelligence and laws, that the laws of human relationship are not rigid, but they're fluid and flexible, but at their core, they bring harmony. They restore harmony. That's Rita from the ancient, the ancient Indian tradition. The Rita, the harmony, brings about a unification of differences, like an orchestra with the different musical instruments. A good composer will do it such that there might be moments of when there's a cacophony, an element of cacophony, but that just makes the melodious tones sweeter by contrast. So you need the limitations, you need the problems. You don't have a golden age without problems. What you have in a golden age, going back to Krita Yuga, is that you have the notion that their perspective is such that you see such a richness and fullness to human beings and such a simplicity of principles to live by in order to have that utmost harmony, at the same time respecting and allowing for differences which bring variety. And it doesn't make it a boring oneness and uniformity. But if you go back to Rama, you're going back to a golden age period where rulers were also enlightened, where they had Raja Rishi. So in other words, the Kshatriya caste is really the ruling class that integrated in the most, in a sense, the most spiritual, because they integrated the teachings with actual decisions and judgments and assessments that they had to make. And they were concerned for they were responsible for the welfare of the entire community, not just in the present, but for generations to come by what they themselves initiated and set down as laws or basic modes of dealing with problems. And furthermore, if you go to the Gita, you see that he speaks in the Gita, I think the 4th chapter, but where he speaks about, this teaching was given to, the Manu given to so forth, and then you get the Raja Rishis. But in time, the ancient knowledge, the deep spiritual understanding and the modes and codes of living up to that understanding were lost over time. And this is always going to happen. However, what's important is to understand that Kali Yuga should not be seen in a blanket sense. There are always going to be streams of golden age thinking. Because why? Because there's a golden heart in every human being that gets clouded over, that gets distracted, that gets misdirected by a culture's false values. And so it takes people a while to regain their footing in our culture, and the modern mind in particular is subject to so much utilitarian thinking about pleasure and happiness being equal and material ends being important, that they lose sight of all you have to do is invert it. Go for spiritual values in a material world. Don't run away from it. Don't be afraid of it either. And that's the biggest problem I see, Veena, is this contagion of fear that's gone through, and it links up with loneliness. And when you have loneliness and fear, that's a bad chemistry. That's a bad equation. And I heard a doctor saying recently, he was a former chief medical officer, and he said that he mentioned these various 2 or 3 illnesses, but he said, if you ask me what I am most concerned about as a doctor, because it relates to health, is what I see as people's increasing isolation from each other. We have a culture that disconnects rather than connects. We have a culture that tells people their wants or needs, and they don't even understand their needs. And so we've lost kind of an orientation. But there are individuals, if we listen to them beyond the media, who exemplify something, who are quiet, unassuming, but they go about bringing goodness into the world, which is not easy. It's not easy to have integrity in this world, particularly if you're involved in any kind of public office. But even in the home, to have a kind of goodwill and to be willing to give up and renounce something for yourself for the sake of a beloved or the sake of someone in need happens all the time. But that's not the kind of thing that we would hear about naturally. But that's what keeps, Gandhi pointed this out, what keeps the world going? All the little microscopic acts of nonviolence that occur in the billions every day. So we need to have faith in, what Emerson said is, there's something deeper going on in America. Thoreau made the comment in his characteristic hyperbolic way when he said, talking about John Brown, the madman supposedly, and he said, very few people have ever died in this country. People said, what? He said, very few people have ever died in this country. There have been a lot of fake memorials. He said, why? Because so few people have really lived. So people have lived a life of principle where they were willing to stand the price of living by their principles, and therefore increasing their self-confidence and increasing their sense of self-worth and their confidence. Every little act of courage on behalf of the good, doesn't matter if it's in the kitchen, or in the parliament, it's going to be the same point. It generates influences which will be affecting other people, and they'll pick up on it. It'll help. It's the propaganda of the deed, as the anarchists used to say.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Robert Moore, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, Jim, you been talking, kind of answering my question, but you talked about moral logic and
Yes.
being critical. I wondered if you could fill that in a bit. You've been kind of giving examples about what it's like to act morally, but what would you have to say about moral logic?
Okay. A young man was with his coworker, and she was she had a child and no husband, and she asked her friend at work if he would be willing to come pick her up on Saturday morning because she was moving, And he was to come pick her up at 8 o'clock in the morning and help her move. And so she could, and her child could go live in a new place, which is less expensive. And he immediately said, oh, absolutely, certainly I will. And so that was fine. This was on Thursday, and Friday came, and he was supposed to go on Saturday. Friday came, and the gentleman who was going to go help the single single mom received a phone call. And he received a phone call from a woman in the office that he was rather entranced by. And so she said, she offered him, would he like to join her and some others on a ski trip over the weekend. He immediately said yes. And he immediately went off. Saturday comes, and the poor single mom is standing there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's no one there. He never comes. She's stuck. Monday comes. She's not a happy camper. And she confronts him. And what does he say? He said, oh, yes, I understand. So sorry, but you see, you have to understand that, his name was John. He said, you just have to understand, the person that made that commitment to you last Thursday was the John of Thursday. This is the John of Monday. And there was the John of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you see, you have an argument with the John of Thursday, but not with the John of Monday. Now, that's ridiculous, of course. That's silly. But the point is, there's continuity in moral consciousness. There has to be continuity. What does that mean? That means when you make a commitment, or when you see what your duty is or your responsibility is, the logic of it is, what does this mean now if I have this responsibility? What is it that I have to ensure? What is it that I have to give up? What is it that I might have to give up? What is it that will happen if I don't show up? So you're thinking rationally, and you're thinking of the logic based on your commitment, vows, resolves, promises, implicit promises, whatever they might be. But anything that involves you in direction, moral direction, a logic flows from it. What you didn't choose also has a logic to it. So it's logic in that way is what I meant by that term, kind of moral logic. People thinking out commitments, resolves, responsibilities, roles, all these things, and what do they imply how do they impact other people? What do they imply for the logic, harmony, and relationships? And when you think that way, you're thinking not just in terms of sheer logic, but you're thinking about the logic of that, of what, if you apply reason to it, it really makes it interesting. So that's one way of looking at it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Jim, I heard you at the very beginning talking about the Piscean age having to do with love on the horizontal dimension,
Yeah.
and that the Aquarian age has to do with truth and ascent on the.
Yeah, ascent. I didn't talk about descent too.
And I imagine it does have to do with descent. You talked about, I think, a concept of love that went deeper also. And so I guess I was wondering if the horizontal plane of love to other people that you talked about, such as missionary efforts to teach strangers in a strange land about the teachings of Christ, for example. But if we're talking about this truth and it having this vertical dimension, is that implying that in the Aquarian age, in an Aquarian civilization, we as human beings would have a better recognition of our connectedness with all the different planes of beings, with the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom and the rocks themselves, as well as with beings on planes above us that we might not even be able to fully imagine. But you did point to having a reverence for wise beings and so on. And so I was wondering if there was that kind of feeling of identification going along this vertical plane, in addition, not losing the horizontal connection, but adding that vertical connection through all the different stages, I guess, along the evolutionary path.
Well, as far as the relationship between truth and love, in this regard, there was reference in the thought piece to love that expands and includes all peoples, as well as the animal kingdom, all sentient beings, and then about the gods bowing in adoration for what this human being who knows something about the wisdom of love and loving. But you see, it's interesting because what is it that provides the energy for rising to higher and higher levels of truth? Because it mentions the mind has many plateaus, and therefore there are many levels of perception of truth. Well, it's love. Love of truth was said to be the highest form of love for a reason. But anyway, so the very aspiration to know, and know in a deeper sense of understanding humanity, that comes from love. So the very ascent begins with the motive of love. Because as you rise, as you point out, the horizon widens as you go. As you move up, the horizontal also moves up. It moves up and it moves out. And therefore, there's a kind of beautiful dialectic or dance between truth and love. And furthermore, when truth loses its momentum at a certain point, love is always there to receive it, so to speak. But love needs intelligence to guide it as well, because it's the force that's why truth is necessary. So when truth kind of descends back down, it informs love of intelligent ways of reaching out to understanding, encompassing, welcoming others. Like one reporter said that when I went in to meet Gandhi, I felt the second I walked in his hut and said hello, and he smiled at me, I could feel an invisible arm going out and going around me and welcoming me, and I sat down. And I came also at that time with a tremendous resolve as a reporter that I'd heard enough praises of Gandhi to last me 10 lifetimes. And so I was going to resolve to get to some truths and some criticisms on Gandhi, contradictions and so forth. But before I could open my mouth, Gandhi began asking me about my background, about my family, and about was everybody healthy and so forth. And pretty soon he was prescribing things for my child that was sick. And by the time I got to my hour, it was only 10 minutes left. And we've been talking about me, not him. And so I asked my questions and he gave me truthful answers. And so when I left, I felt I'd been in the presence of the greatest man I'd ever seen. So his resolve, went to ashes. But the interesting point is this is a beautiful, truth has to be enacted, and love gives the energy, and truth gives the clarity of direction. But at the same time, truth without love, without any kind of energetic resolve, and that's where a vow comes in. And Gandhi was keen on vows under certain conditions, because certain things like spiritual mountain climbing isn't done just by saying you want to do it. I mean, an academician who studies Sanskrit and knows all kinds of finer meanings and subtler meanings in Sanskrit and all the various Sanskritic texts isn't necessarily a devotee at all until you take a vow based on a commitment to the ideals that are expressed in the Upanishads, are in Shankara's philosophy, are in Christ's teachings. You're not going to really be someone who's going to understand how truth and love work in their dynamics in terms of life, unless in previous lives you had been so doing and you have a natural aptitude for certain things. But in this life, you have to make a commitment. And that involves truth and love. And they do expand. The higher you go, the wider the circle of love can be. And the mobility is the beautiful thing that Sri Raghav and I are pointed out a lot. Once you go up this staircase, or once you go up the ladder of of truth, and love is helping you and you're working as co-partners, you end up getting an incredible mobility so that you can, like Einstein, come down and talk to a child and really enjoy the conversation of talking to a child and the wonder of the child and their questions, which are always frank and guileless, some of which are very amusing. And then he could go back into his home and have an extensive conversation and discussion with with a mathematician who loves pure theory. So he has that mobility, that intellectual mobility, but seeing in terms of a spiritual mobility, then you have identity. You're able to dissolve identity images. When you begin to go into the stratosphere of human consciousness, transformations of the mind, you begin to, there's a suppleness, and your identity you're able at will to set aside in order to understand other beings. And so therefore, because you're under the light of truth, which has no image, it's able to see into all other images. And so the closer you get to truth, the more you get to the ray of light that is behind the spectrum of colors. And you can then see the light in every one of the colors and not getting distracted by the differences in the colors. But at the same time, you appreciate the differences.
Did you want to make a comment or ask a question? I saw you taking in a lot.
David, your word, I can imagine it.
That was a lot, Jim. I wouldn't even know where to start, except some of your end remarks about how when the truth is revealed, and when love is present, how things start to dissolve. I was immediately thinking of Carl Rogers and his approach of unconditional love and positive regard, and just in the space of that, people can find their own answers. The troubles tend to dissolve away. And so you also mentioned that in this future age, there will be no need for therapists because friends have evolved to the point where these highly evolved people like Carl Rogers have come to. And so as we evolve to become what some of these great healers have already known, I think that's kind of the move in that direction. But then I was also fascinated by this idea of going vertical, because if you just head out in any direction and go straight for a while, you can eventually end up going all the way around the planet, and it all pretty much, except for some bumps here and there, looks like flatland. And then I got to think about when you go vertical, which seems to be happening now. We have several people that are sending rockets into space and have plans for getting a little more vertical in that way. It reminded me of this here, and I'll just give a little visual demonstration, is when you go vertical, you suddenly get this different perspective that it's not flat land. It's all just one. It's this big circle that the universe seems to be making these spheres throughout.
Yeah.
And that vertical perspective is how you finally get to see that. And I think the first visuals that I had of that were from the Big Island, when you can look up in the mountain, the ocean starts to look, you start to see the curve of the earth, and it's a beautiful perspective. I really have no questions. I'm just, as usual, blown away by the things that you provide for us. So thank you.
You're welcome. I like the reference to Carl Rogers. And it's interesting, there's a kind of parallel between Carl Rogers and the Dalai Lama, in the sense that when Carl Rogers talks about unconditional love, and it's the key to really making relationships or restoring relationships or regenerating relationships and making them more wholesome. And in the act of doing so, the person becomes more whole too, and becomes regenerated as well. So the very act to do something worthy and helpful to someone else and make it unconditional is not easy. But the Dalai Lama says we see in the Tibetan tradition that a wonderful model of the unconditionality and therefore of detachment is a mother. A mother has to be unconditional and detached in the sense that she is willing to give up an awful lot in order to see and tend to the well-being of her child, including her body, her self-image. Her image gets challenged a lot. Furthermore, she has to think in advance of what kind of person am I trying to nurture, my husband and me. What kind of human being are we attempting to nurture? What kind of qualities are we trying to instill, to cultivate, to have them germinate? Or what kind of qualities do we see in our child that we want to continue to encourage? And what kind of qualities do we want that child to weed out? Because they're going to be harmful and hurtful, and they're going to cause problems later on in life. A mother has to be both frank and warm. And think of that dialectic, truth and love. She has to see clearly. She has to see the future. In some sense, she has to see what's evolving and what she's trying to guide. And that goes, a lot of pain goes with that, and a lot of also pleasure goes with that too. Satisfaction that you've done something right for a change, that, the child turns around and does something really sweet for someone else. And they do it spontaneously. Because the Dalai Lama, as well as Theosophy, points to the fact, you don't just want an alpha intellect, you want an alpha heart. See? And so in true education, which begins with the parents in the Hindu tradition, they're your teachers until you go to the Gokula, till you go to the home of a teacher. And then the teachers, both husband and wife, are intended to be examples of what the children are supposed to grow up into. So the parenting is so important. As is pointed out, it begins in the womb. What do you watch? What pictures do you watch? What sounds do you hear? What activities do you engage in? All these matter. And so it's beginning to shape and influence the fetus and the child's development. And now we know through brain and research how much the brain of a child and of a young person is shaped in ways that are very difficult to reverse later on if there's like too much, what are those things, video games and other things. Now you start getting into marijuana and other things like that, well, good luck. But I mean, it's all these things that make people passive. It's better to have the child go out and moan and groan and piss and moan and have him mow the yard than sit down in front of video games for 2 hours. They might not like it then, but later on, they'll be glad you established the habit. You have responsibilities. If our culture was one which was super like that, like the Germans were, then you want the opposite. You want them to feel freer. You want them to ask questions. You want them to be creative. But where you have a culture that doesn't provide codes that are vital, morally vital, each parent now, each set of parents has to become their own little universe, their own little microcosm, as Jenny Bichef beautifully drew out in the previous talk on Aquarian Civilization. Yeah, you need to see now, that's the beauty of America in a way. You can create your own little culture. You can create your own little mini weather system. You can create your own little orbit of Earth. You can invite people in, and you can also have your children go out, but with discrimination. It's important to know what they're doing and who they're with. This sounds like monitoring. Yes, it is, because our culture doesn't provide for that at all. Look at what invades schools. You can't even get through grammar school without encountering some of the worst elements in our culture. How sad is that? As one thinker pointed out, all children participated in the golden age up until the age of 3. Their consciousness is so pure. And then the world starts entering in. Now, Wordsworth put it differently. He said the prison house, at first our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, because the soul has had elsewhere its setting. And then he goes on to talk about the glories of the soul, of the radiance that the child feels around it and within it, and its capacity to perceive this in others and in nature. And it might be to some degree a kind of self-projection, but it's a good one. He sees only the goodness of his mother, the nobility of his father. The irksome brothers and sisters, they have their good qualities too. but nonetheless, but when they reach a certain point, then the prison house begins to close. As you go through puberty and else, then you need your culture to encourage you to individuate, to encourage you to rebel, but in a good way, so that you're trying to reassess things and find your own moral footing in a world and be your own individual.
Diana.
I think your vision is so important for us to have in our day and age because people don't have that vision. And you spoke about love and truth, and I think there's a truth of what's going on in the world. And I think you kind of answered what I was thinking, is that you mentioned that we each have our own bubble, and that in a way we have to live from a love and the higher levels and meditation and live that in our daily life. We can't change everything that's going on around us, but we can do that within our family or with one other person. And how do we live our love in our daily life? And yet, how do we keep the truth? And you said, don't listen to the news. Well, I kind of want to know what's going on, but I don't want to get caught in it. And it's like, if I get caught in,
Yeah, that's a challenge. Yes.
yeah, and if I get caught in the all that's going on, it's hard for me to stay from a place of unconditional love. But I also think I need to balance that out. I need to know what's going on, but I also want to live my life with integrity and unconditional love. And you talked about creating that bubble or creating that and inviting people in. And I think having the vision of what you said is so important, because if we have a vision of how we want our society to be, I thought, well, when is the Aquarian age changing? This is since 1902. It seems like it's getting worse, but it's like, how do we encourage that? And I think the only way that we can encourage it is by living our life with integrity, love, compassion, meditation, and living every moment that we can from that place, because the frequency and energetics of that are going to hold that vision. And the more of us that hold that vision, the more that it can change. But if we don't have that vision, then it's almost like we get caught in all the stuff that's going on and the fear. And I think that's what's happened to our society, is we're so caught up in the fear and the untruths that we're forgetting the love and the compassion that's needed. So I really appreciate your vision. Thank you so much.
Equal, coming back to you, that was really quite beautiful and articulate. I'm reminded of the Native American tribes that said, you have to have a vision. Even if you have to go on a fast for 10 days, you have to have a vision. But that's might be a little extreme in one way. But the point, the point is that it's interesting, this is kind of hard to maybe articulate, but see if you can follow what I'm saying. We are part of the world, right? And the challenge is how to be in the world, but not of the world. And how do we embody Christ's statement about coming you out and be separate? He wasn't meaning to reject or judge human beings. Remember, he says, don't judge. 7 times 70, don't judge. So no, it's separating yourself out from the dross, separating yourself out from things you know to be delusional or being illusory or being superficial or not helping anyone, to step back from that. But I think what is interesting, a person who can accept what's going on and see it from a certain perspective is actually helping the future, because your mind connects up with other minds. Kahlil Gibran speaks about when you go to prayer and you go into deep meditation and you turn your heart and your whole consciousness towards the divine, you are making contact at that very hour where all other devotees, it doesn't matter their religion, but if they are in like state of mind, state of heart mind, then you have a kind of vibrational connection, so that you are resonating together. And for a moment, you form a kind of community, a kind of communing community, even though it's unconscious and unknown. But it's not unknown to sages. Sages know these things by experience. They're not called sages for no reason. And they don't care about titles. It's what they are and what they know everyone can do and does to some degree. So we have to learn, as you're talking about, how to accept things and then discriminate and then maintain, see what you yourself must reject and what you must accept. And where you can accept good things, compliment it when you see it, because more you compliment what's good in the culture, the more you celebrate greatness passing by, as Sri Raghavan used to mention, then you're doing something, you're adding to collective good. And so many ways we can at a micro level contribute to collective good, as long as our perspective is not immediate. Because see, a lot of things, it's just the first, this 2,000-year cycle of the Aquarian age. So It's not like we've burned it up. Yeah, so we need to have patience. As Gandhi once said by a reporter saying to him, gee, Mr. Gandhi, something was finally done, passed in the legislature, but it was you started this 19 years ago. And he said, yes. So some things might take 1,000 years. Don't get attached to time. It's the fact that it got worked out and people agreed. That's important, not the event and how soon it was done.
I am aware of time to the extent that I know that we're going to lose Jim right at the top of the hour. So what I'd like to do is let you know, while somebody is thinking about how they might give a vote of thanks to Jim Tepfer, I'd like to let you know about our next 2 weeks. Next week will be the week when we celebrate the founding of the United Nations. And our topic is One Great Human Family. And Nancy Ocker, who happens to be my mother, is going to be speaking from the tradition of world peace. The following week, we'll do something really different from what we usually do, although we have done something like this once or twice in the past. We will be teaming up with the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara, of which Carolyn Dorrance, who's with us now, is the president. And we are going to have an opportunity to listen to the presentation that is going to be given there. The topic for the week is a Republic of Conscience. This is going to sound really very much like a family affair. That talk is actually going to be given by my husband, Cliff Tillotson. He's going to be speaking on Abraham Lincoln on this topic of a Republic of Conscience and the idea of freedom as it's embodied in the American dream. And he's not only going to be speaking about it, he's going to be speaking as it. So he's going to come as Abraham Lincoln to give that talk. So it should be really quite engaging, I can imagine. Even though it's going to be live streamed for us, I don't know that we're going to have the opportunity to ask questions and so on, but it should be quite engaging. It'll happen an hour later. So it's going to start at what would in Hawaii not be 3 p.m., but 4 p.m. And there's a 2-hour segment. If he finishes early, there may be time for questions, I understand, but I can't speak on that. So I will give you a link to attend that live streamed event. So there you go. Those are the next 2 weeks at our Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. And may I ask if there's anyone who would like to give Jim a vote of thanks for his beautiful presentation and addressing questions that we had for him.
As Ramana Maharishi said, silence too is also a form of conversation.
I would like to thank Jim. I was very busy today and I could not stop myself to come here for this hour. So thank you. And I am really thinking about this triangulation of truth, love, and vow. And I think I'm going to figure it out with you how truth and vow work together, how truth, vow, and love work together, and how the power of vow becomes a more tangible way to express both. So thank you so much for enlightening us and bringing shining light to the truth and love.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it for everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.